don't tell me it's going to happen again. Sorry about that, but this computer is a little crazy because in PowerPoint on this computer, I have to shut it down and restart it again in order for PowerPoint to come up. And so that's what's happening here. This turns on. Ah, hark. Okay, so don't tell me I'm going to have to get up on a chair and move that. Pardon? No, I think we're going to have to do something. Maybe I'm going to put it over on the other screen. I don't know. But hold on a second. Is there a way to get the projector down? Somebody moved it way up, and I'm only getting half the picture on the screen. Do we have a hook or something that we pull? Oh. Oh, yeah, it's fine on the screen. Hmm? Yeah.
Hmm? I did do the source on this one. I know it's kind of funny idea.
So what? Which one? Video? No.
Yeah, it's cooking. Let it.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, sir.
What makes him happy is really.
That's true. Okay, you can get the donuts. Okay, just a little note here. This is the instrument panel of is my students in the front seat. This is the variometer, and it tells the pilot, and the flight instructor too, how fast you're going up in the lift. That shows 900 feet a minute we're going up. Faster than most light aircraft can climb at full power. That's how good gliders are when they get into lift. Okay, facts about glider flying. Remember, be selective about the notes you take. Try to assume that what I think is important is what you think is important. That's always a difficult situation of trying to figure out, now does Mr. Gallagher think that's important or not? Will it wind up on a test or not? For example, I probably wouldn't ask you about most of the world's competitive gliders are built in Germany. It's a good piece of information, but it's not necessarily essential to your understanding of and how they fly. Now, this one is important. They're made of fiberglass and carbon fiber. Why? Because they're lighter and stronger, and because a glider is stressed for turbulence far greater than a commercial airliner. Now remember, there are a lot of notes in this presentation, so I don't want you to get your fingers all strained. Everybody ready to move on? Yes or no? Not yet? Okay. We're talking about gliders here, and I want you to keep in the back of your mind the comparison between gliders and power. I mean, flying power is just as important as flying gliders. I flew power for 20 years before I finally flew gliders. But when I finally flew gliders, I realized how important it is, how crucial it is to understand true aerodynamics that you don't necessarily get from flying an airplane with a propeller in front. Everybody ready? Okay. So this is a hangar at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and now they've pulled off, they've given it to the Civil Air Patrol, all these Blonics. They now have about 40 or 50 of these beautiful 1001 DG-1001 aircraft. They're dual place. And all 4 years, the cadets fly gliders. At the end of their term, they'll get an engineering degree. And then after the engineering degree, when they graduate, then they send them to power training school. Okay, some records here on gliders. Just so your friends say, well, you know, gliders can't do anything. They can't go anywhere. They can't get very high. There's not a commercial airliner in the world that is capable of climbing to 50,000 feet. Period. It doesn't happen. It's impossible. The engines on a commercial airliner can't get enough air at 50,000 feet to burn enough fuel to get up that high. Ready? Say yes or no. I mean, I want you guys to, you men and women, to speak out. If you're not ready, say, no, I'm not ready, Mr. Gallagher. To me, that sounded like, Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. Now, this is another interesting thing you need to be aware of as you go through your pilot training. From a physics point of view, you describe air and water in what are called differential equations. Have you guys had differential equations in high school? Okay. The pair of differential equations for water and air are identical. If you lay them side by side, they're exactly the same. The only difference is you can compress air, but you can't compress water. But that's not significant. What's significant is that they're identical, which means that air flows exactly the way water flows. We just can't see air. So as a pilot, or as a future pilot, or a rider in a commercial airliner, if you're getting near rough terrain, blowing, you know you're going to get bounced around, because if it was water that you were looking at, the water is going to be tumbling like in a rapid in a river. Or there was an accident in the Swiss Andes a week ago, and an old airplane, an old Junkers, was coming at a ridgeline, and the air was coming up over the ridgeline. So what happens to the air when it comes up over the ridgeline and the slope is down like this? What happens to the air? It's a waterfall. It's an airfall, actually, but it has so much force, just like water, that when the Junkers got into that airfall, it drove it down onto a glacier. So if you always think in the back of your mind that you envision what air looks like by thinking about water, you will really have a good handle on what's ahead of you so you don't scare your passengers. Just like this, in the Grand Canyon, It's nice and smooth, but as things happen, as there are mountains or big boulders underneath the water, that's what happens. Well, it's the same as you're flying around, even flying near Reedley with those big mountains that are sitting there next to Reedley along 180. Okay, this is a training glider. This is a glider that we use all the time. I have 4,000 flights in that glider, 4,000 instructional flights in that glider. Not that particular one, but that model of glider. It's the most widely used glider in the United States. It's called the Schweitzer 233, and it's bulletproof, which means that if students make mistakes, that they slam the glider down too hard when they're landing, if they do things like that, it doesn't just break and fall apart. This is a high-performance glider. It has an 80-foot wingspan made of carbon fiber and fiberglass. And that 60-to-1 ratio up there means that if there's no lift in the air and he gets towed up to a mile above the ground, that means with no lift at all, he can glide 60 miles without lift. That's what a 60-to-1 means. It's a ratio of how far you can glide horizontally for every 1 foot or 1 mile of altitude. Now, we call aspect ratio. That's something that you will probably get into when you get into some of your AMT courses, your aviation maintenance technology courses, and it's simply the fact that you take the span of the wing, you divide by the average chord. The average chord is right here. You take the span and you divide it, and you come up with some number. What's interesting is the latest Boeing aircraft, the 787, called the Dreamliner, was designed with this in mind. It was designed like with glider wings, because the wings, in fact, are composite. And so they were able to make the wings longer and slimmer, narrower. So that's one of the reasons why it gets much better fuel economy. Okay, energy management is really important. Okay, we talked about briefly, I said, between kinetic and potential. In all of your aviation career, if you have one, I hope you have one, you're going to experience potential and kinetic energy. Potential and kinetic energy. And I can tell you, from the standpoint of automobiles, kinetic energy may someday bite you in the foot, because you may not realize this, and I want you to be able to go home and teach this to your friends and family and whatever. But kinetic energy kills people. Kinetic energy, you know, you'll see signs that say speed, don't go over 50, don't go over miles an hour, try to stay under 60, don't be speeding. But it's not speed that kills you, it's kinetic energy. So this is, to write it properly, E sub K goes 1/2 mv squared. Do you guys have that kind of, you have formulas like that in high school? Are you familiar with formulas like that? So you don't know what this 2 means up here? You do? Okay. Kinetic energy is 1/2 the mass, which is in case the weight of the car or the glider, times the velocity squared, right? So, you guys driving along with your friends and they're going 40 miles an hour, right? Right? And your friend says, hey, I'm going to see if I can do 50 or 60. And you plead with him, no. And he says, okay, I'll just keep it down to 50. So now he goes to 50, right? The speed increase is about 25%, right? The speed increase from 40 to 50 is about 25% increase, huh? But the kinetic energy increase is 57%. And it's kinetic energy that kills people. It's kinetic energy that causes people to rear-end one another because they don't realize that as they're traveling down a street, they're trying to bring this big car to a stop. Where you can see that the most is if you watch on television Formula One racers or the NASCAR races. You see whenever there's an accident, the car starts tumbling and pieces start flying off. They're designed to do that to get rid of the energy, not the speed. They're designed to come apart to get rid of the energy so that it doesn't kill the guy driving the car. So this is really, really crucial here, that even at home or in an aircraft, even when you're flying, when you're driving around your neighborhood or somewhere with your parents or friends, every time they increase that speed, they're increasing it by the square of the speed, not just 40 to 50. That's what that little speedometer says, but that speedometer doesn't count when it comes to an accident. What counts is trying to get rid of kinetic energy. Okay. So, any aircraft, whether it's a glider or not, has two energy tanks. In the case of power, a powered aircraft, power fills this tank, and nature fills this tank for a glider. So power, nature fills this tank, and then as it's speeding, as it's using airspeed just to stay aloft, it's bleeding that off. And all aircraft, even cars, have energy tanks, right? If you go up over a bridge, you're probably going to have to add a little bit more fuel to get up to the top of the bridge, but then you're going to realize as you're coming down the other side of the bridge, you can probably let up on the gas a little bit because you don't want to speed too much. You used energy in the car to get more potential energy at the top of the bridge. Then you use kinetic energy to coast down the other side of the bridge. Really important concept for moving aircraft and automobiles around, and race cars, and anything else that moves. Okay, how do gliders fly without power? They're always descending. Always. If they're not descending, they're not getting any speed, right? So gravity, in a way, is helping the glider fly. They convert potential energy into kinetic energy. How do we get up in the air? An airplane tows us up. An airplane with a propeller. They tow us up to 2,000 feet, or 3,000 feet, or 4,000 feet, or whatever number, and then we're on our own. And if we don't find lift, what happens to us? Come back down, yeah. Yeah, that's it. We come back down. So, the training gliders descend at 175. Right. So we have to find lift. So where do you find lift? And this, I told them at Lemoore Air Station in the summertime, he took off from Tahoe Airport and realized that he couldn't climb because it was too hot. So he went and found some strong thermals and circled in the thermals in a power plane and got up high enough to get over the mountains and back to Fresno. Or back to Lemoore, actually. He's going back to Lemoore. Okay, so here are the main sources of lift. There's a thermal. I describe the thermal saying this. The sun doesn't heat the air. Everybody knows that, right? Because the air is an insulator, isn't it? Air is like a thermos bottle. A thermos bottle has walls that have air in between them. So air is an insulator. So how do the hot air start rising? Because the sun heats the ground, and the air that's laying on top of the ground gets heated by contact with the ground. And that's how a thermal gets done. So a thermal, in effect, is circulating. It's like the opposite of running water out of your bathtub, right? When you pull the plug on a bathtub, the water circles and goes down. Well, when you have heat rising, it circulates going up. And in these fires, if you guys have been watching television about the fires, they've been showing fire thermals, where actually the fire itself is circulating like that and going up. Convergence means that you have two air masses. You have a cold air mass from the coast, and you have a hot air mass from the Central Valley. And when they collide, the cold air goes down, it wedges underneath, the hot air goes up. And there's this line. Sometimes the line is only 100 feet wide, but the air is going up, and you can fly that line for hundreds of miles if it's available. Okay, that's convergence. Ridge or slope is obviously right. When it hits the mountain and goes up, you can get into that rising air. And a mountain wave is a big difference. A mountain wave is like taking a rock and throwing it into the water. What happens to the surface of the water? Yeah, it starts rippling, right? And those ripples can continue on if there's no boundary. As far as the air is concerned, it's the same thing. When the air strong enough hits a mountain like the High Sierra, what happens is it hits and it starts doing this on the other side, all the way into Colorado. 300 or 400 miles, you're going to get these ripples, and I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, there's a typical dust devil, which is a thermal. And a thermal is dragging all of that dust out. And you can see a little bit of a lightness in here. That's because you're looking at the wall, and it's circulating around. So you're seeing that that is a rising column of hot air. And as soon as we glider pilots see that, we want to rush over and get right on top of it, because we know we're going to get lifted up rather rapidly. There's a huge thermal. You can see the width of it. It was so big that you could probably have put 4 or 5 airplanes in the middle of that thermal. In this particular case, I happen to mention that one of our power planes was sitting there, and a thermal came by, picked it up, spun it around, broke one wingtip, spun it around again, broke another wingtip, and then set it down on its wheels facing exactly the opposite of the way it was parked. That's the strength of thermals. Looks at convergence and shear lines. Here you can get some idea. I just described to you what that's about. Just think in terms of convergence means colliding air masses, cool and hot. That's all you have to remember about a convergence. They are colliding air masses, one being cold, one being hot. You don't have to describe it as much as I have here. I just want you to remember that it is one of the sources of lift. Okay. In this particular case, convergence lines at Avenal, we have cold air coming from the coast. So this mountain range is called the Tembler Range, which means that it's formed by earthquakes. The San Andreas Fault's right on the other side. So you get the cold air coming over here, and now you have the hot air of the valley. And when they collide, they start doing this. They start giving signatures of thermals, and there's usually a whole long line of them all the way along the mountain line. You could see probably for 30 or 40 miles, if you can see that far, little thermals being created as a result of the collision. Okay, one of the most spectacular of all lift sources is a mountain wave. And for so many years, up until 1951, no one knew anything about it. Finally, airplanes were being totally destroyed going into the wrong part of a mountain wave until the Navy decided that they were going to investigate what in the world is going on. So they hired the Los Angeles Glider Club to go into the Owens Valley around Bishop, and when they got there, they decided they would start going up and going into the mountain wave and trying to find out what happens in the mountain wave. They know that there are certain places where the air goes up, right? Like in a ripple. What they didn't know was what was destroying these gliders. There was this thing about a twin engine, a fighter, a P-38 Lightning twin engine, found some lift on a really severe day. He throttled both engines back, and he was able to circle in lift for an hour. A big, huge, heavy P-38 bomber, or fighter also, was able to stay in lift for more than an hour. Okay, so let's take a look. This is what a mountain wave looks like, and you'll see the real terrible part of it is right here. It's called a rotor cloud. And that rotor cloud, literally, if you get stuck into it, you'll probably destroy your airplane. Right? So if you're going to be flying, especially up the Owens Valley, that's where these rotors are. They're up in the Owens Valley when the speed of the air over the High Sierra is more than 25 knots. So if it's a fairly calm day, there are no rotor clouds. If you take a day when it's 20 miles an hour, there might be a tiny little rotor, but it wouldn't be anything to worry about. But the minute you start getting up to 25 and 30 knots and higher, then the rotor clouds get really, really bad. And I mean so bad that you can see what happens here. This is the High Sierra. Bishop is down here somewhere. This is the Sierra looking south. So to that way, west is this way. and you can see the air comes scouring down, and it goes up into these rotor clouds. And literally, that was what was happening with the Navy. The Navy was having a lot of their aircraft being destroyed. Sometimes the pilot would survive, sometimes he wouldn't. And that particular time when the Navy was interested was in 1952 in January, and there was such a severe mountain wave that it created so much snow and so much turbulence that it buried this streamliner. It was up there for more than a week, and they had to go up there and rescue the people out of the streamliner in order to get them to safety. That was what was happening with this particular huge mountain wave storm. So, as part of the investigation into the wave, the Navy hired the Los Angeles Soaring Club to come up to the Owens Valley and start flying, investigating flights into the wave. And what Larry Edgar found was that if you get into the rotor, that's what happened to his glider. It shredded his glider. He said that he was in the rotor for half an hour in his parachute. His boots had been torn off of him. He finally was able to get down somehow out of the rotor and down to the ground. And then, of course, when he got to the ground, he was being dragged along. But he, as you can see, he did survive. But this is the kind of thing where all the records, all the glider records in the world have been done through a mountain wave. And as I mentioned earlier, the record altitude of 50,773, that was done in Argentina on the other side of the Andes Mountain, just like the U.S. glider records for altitude were established around Bishop on the other side of the High Sierra. So on some days, you take a look at satellite view, and you can see all these waves. And most of the waves are created by the coast mountains, right? You have a string of coast mountains along here. You can see how it ripples and ripples. This happens to be a fairly calm day for that. One of the pictures I had showed a very strong day where the ripples were already into Nevada and on their way to Colorado. It's fun to get into it as long as you stay away from the rotor because it's the smoothest air ever. I mean, I sit there in a glider with my student. I have the tip of my fingers on the stick, the control stick. Nothing's moving except all of a sudden the altimeter is just winding up. We're going up at 1,000 feet a minute. And you just go up straight like an elevator. You point the glider into the wind. So if the wind is at 50 knots, you make the glider go 50 knots. So now you're right over a spot on the ground, and it's just like an elevator. So here's the beginnings of rotor clouds that were photographed. In fact, I think I took these photographs. This is out at Avenal. Some of those gliders there are training gliders, and some are privately owned. But the wind is from the left. And so within just a matter of minutes, those clouds that you see there that look sort of nondescript, they sort of look pretty benign and not really harmful to anybody, they turned into that. And if anybody had been in there or near there, they probably would have had to parachute out of their glider because it would probably have torn the glider apart. Okay, so here we're back to the really important issue if you're going to be a pilot. At 6,000 feet altitude. The plane is all trimmed up. Let's say you're doing 100 miles an hour and you're at 6,000 feet. And you advance the throttle it'll climb at exactly the same speed that the elevator has been set for. The elevator controls speed. And you're probably going to find, if you happen to be talking to anybody, you're going to probably find that if somebody is a pretty good pilot, or even if they're a flight instructor, they may start arguing with you. And if you say to them, look, if what you're telling me is true, then how do gliders fly? Right? If power controls speed, then it's impossible for a glider to fly. So the proof of this concept is at a glider port. I make this statement about flying gliders because for gliders, our engine is weather, isn't it? We need to know about weather because we want to know where the lift is, how high can we get, how far along the mountains the lift is good, how far can we go on a day when we think the lift is pretty good. So knowing about weather is important for us as glider pilots. But think about power pilots. As a power pilot, you're probably going to fly into that weather way faster than gliders. Normally, we're flying at around 80 to 90. We thermal at about 40. So we're going up in lift at about 40 miles an hour. But when we decide to leave that lift and go down the mountain range and find another thermal, we go at about 80 miles an hour, roughly, sometimes 90, but not much more than that. But a power plane, 130, 160, 200 miles an hour? So power pilots can get into bad weather way faster than we can. So you can never know too much about it. So one of the things we do is we pay really close attention to clouds. And I can guarantee you that you will never look at the sky the same way again when you start thinking about, hey, what's causing that cloud? Is it lift or no lift? Will it be turbulent underneath or not turbulent? What was that cloud telling me? And so if you're a glider pilot, you're desperate, right? Because you need to find lift. You don't want to have to land in a field somewhere, like I've done a few times. But as a power pilot, you just want to avoid it because your passengers don't know about turbulence. They don't understand whether the wings are going to be torn off or whether they're going to get sick or what. So you want to make sure that if you're flying around and taking passengers with you, be real careful about their feelings because they have no idea what's happening. They don't know why the turbulence is being created. You can tell them to envision the sky as water. That helps a little bit. Okay, so one of the clouds, that's lift, and you can go for miles and miles, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles in some cases. And so if you were going to evaluate the wind and how that was created, this slide should show you. Interesting. Now, you don't have to write this down and you don't have to, but just sit back and relax and absorb the idea that clouds can tell you a lot about what's going on in the air. And as I said, you'll never look at the sky the same way. Because if you look from here, let's say east or west, you can envision thermals. They're like trees, right? They go up and then they sort of get to the point where they branch out because now they're getting to the point where there's no more difference between hot air and cold air. And on days when there's no lift, it would look like there were stumps of a cut forest. So then these next few slides are just ideas that if you take a look at the sky, you can determine what's going on. Now, this happens to be a thunderstorm, near a thunderstorm, and those clumps of clouds are heavy with rain, heavy with water. And so instead of just raining, for some reason or another, the attractiveness of the clouds, the electrical particles of plus and minus in the clouds have kept the water together, but it's sagged down into these clumps. Now, you're not going to very often see that. I think I saw it once looking from my house towards Madeira. And every once in a while, I'll see the beginnings of these little clumps, but not very often. Now, this I see once in a while, but it only takes 80 seconds and it's gone. And what happens is two air masses are one on top of another, right? Or they're sliding across one another. And when they slide across one another, they create that. The point there is that if you think that you get in an airplane and you climb up, that the air is all the same or homogeneous, right? It's not. At one level, the air might be coming from this direction. At the next level, it might be coming this direction. At the next level, it might be turbulent, then smooth, and turbulent. And the air is filled with layers of different things happening. It's never what you think it is. Everybody thinks that, oh, well, the air is the air. It's the same here as it is all the way up there. No, not at all. The idea where the wind is blowing and it's going over the mountain, right? And as the air gets lifted, the temperature of the air. And when it gets colder, what happens? It turns invisible, right? That's what a cloud is. A cloud is full of moisture droplets that the air can no longer hold in solution. It's like if you take a glass of cold water and you start putting spoonfuls of sugar in there and stirring it up, right? You can do that for a while, but there's going to be one point in time where you put that spoonful of sugar in there and it's going to fall to the bottom, and no matter what you do, you can't get it to dissolve into the water. It's the same thing with air. A cloud is nothing more than a part of the air that could no longer hold moisture in solution. Again, the lenticulars are the tops of those ripples that are downwind, right? Lenticulars are signs that the air is going up and down, up and down, up and down all the way. And when you look towards the Sierra, if you can see lenticulars, you'll know that the air is pretty strongly north, the other side of the Owens Valley. There's Mount Rainier. You can see some of the. Now, if you're flying along in an airplane, there are some things you're going to want to avoid, right? That's why I'll tell you an awful lot about what's happening. There's Mount Shasta. Those are lenticulars over Mount Shasta. The air again has gone up, gotten into some, so the moisture goes down the other side. It warms up again, and the moisture disappears. There's a mixture of everything. You can see almost everything. You can see cumulus, you can see stratus, you can see lenticulars. Again, that's probably not a day you want to be flying around too much. Okay, so that completes the presentation. What we're going to do now is we're going to do the correction to this quiz. But are there any questions? Any question? No questions? Wow. Did I do that good a job? Okay, get out your pencils. You're going to grade these. I think I'm going to be able to, so you don't get the same one here. Pass that back. 3 to you guys here. And Catherine, 4 for you. If you get your own paper, let me know. We'll have to switch it with somebody else. Oh, it's going to wind up. Don't tell me we're in the wrong row here now. And Jacob, so that's yours, isn't it? And you got one? Okay. Everybody have one? I don't want you grading your paper. You want to make sure that you're grading someone else's paper. What do you have? Oh, okay. Thanks. Oh, excuse me. Okay, 3, 2. I don't know how that happened. Are there any papers extra left over? Oh, yeah, you didn't take the test anyway, so pass those back. I don't know. Don't know where it is. All right, ready to grade? Where'd she get the money? Her husband, right? Yeah. What was her husband's name? George Putnam, right? Okay. Were women welcomed into aviation in the early days? No. Name 2 flight records that Amelia earned. You could have chosen any one of 4 or 5 that I had listed there, so. Anybody? Flight records? How about LA to Mexico City? And then Mexico City back to Newark? Those are 2. Those are easy, right? Or solo flight across the Atlantic? Or Hawaii to Oakland? Okay, so don't forget to mark them. Make sure there are 2. How many miles did she plan around the world flight? How much? 29,000, right? Okay. What was her first leg on her flight around the world from east to west? The real flight. And that meant that her first leg was Hawaii to Miami. No, well, Hawaii to Oakland and then Oakland to Miami. She wound up going that way. But the first leg was getting from Hawaii, after they repaired the plane, getting from there back to the mainland. That was the first leg. When she got to Miami, all the newspaper people thought that the first leg was California to Miami, but it wasn't. It was Hawaii to California. What was her navigator's name? Right. Why did she the Howland Island? What? The trailing wire, exactly. Throwing that trailing wire away doomed she and Fred Noonan. That's how sad it was. That was the one thing that they insisted she take with her, because they knew she was going to have trouble. Unless she did it, she was going to have trouble with direction finding. So the idea was going to cut her. She was very well, and she wouldn't be able to communicate with the Itasca. All right, what do most experts think she crashed instead of her original destination? Yeah, Nico. Okay. What basic learning principle did she violate that led to her death? Didn't follow instructions, right? She didn't follow instructions. That was one of those things we learned. Remember our learning presentation the day before? Yes, Kiara. Pardon? She didn't listen. I will accept that. I will accept that she didn't listen. Back to talking about. Oh, what learning? Which one are you talking about? Number 8, 9, or 10? 9. Huh? Number 9? Well, remember what I was looking for was guys to go back to that first presentation. Instructions. And she was told specifically that she needed that antenna in order to be able to survive. And the fact that she did not follow instructions is the fundamental reason why, in my opinion. I mean, if you gave me something a little different than that, but sort of, I'm kind of a pushover a little bit when it comes to quizzes. So I probably would have given it to you a little bit. Just like the question, remember the question I had the last, when it said, what are the licenses? Conclusion of 4 semesters here at Reedley. Right. If somebody said CFI, well, that's one of the 4, actually 5, right? That's one of the 5. But I gave you full credit for it because in order to get a CFI, you have to get the previous drone license. I kind of ignored the drone license as a requirement, and I said, okay, if you told me that you needed to get a CFI at the end of did get a CFI, I knew that you'd have private and commercial and an instrument rating. Otherwise, you wouldn't get a CFI. I gave you a full. That's all you put down was CFI. I gave you full points. Okay, do you think Amelia advanced the cause for women in aviation? So than almost anyone that I can. publicity-minded as someone who also helped aviation. She won all kinds. When I had Bank Airport, and occupied at various times by Howard Hughes, Amelia Earhart, and Paul Mance, and a whole bunch of other people who were doing some phenomenal flying back in the early 30s and mid 40s. And when I came to Burbank Airport, I was allowed to use that hangar, huge, huge hangar. It was featured in National Geographic in 1933. So I had some touch with the early pioneers. Okay, so that's how you want to grade them. And then pass them all forward. So I take a look at these tests and I find gave them take that part off and take it off your. So exercise authority, accept responsibility, that kind of thing. Okay, we have a few minutes yet. Any questions about anything that we're going to be doing? Tomorrow and Friday are hands-on days. I'm not sure what we may be firing rockets. I know that we just got a big load of stuff in from Amazon. Don't do that anymore because it disturbs me when I'm talking and it disturbs other people from listening to me. So I don't accept that. Is that clear? Okay, good. Remember, I'm a pushover when it gets to certain things, but after that, I'm not a pushover anymore. Looking at all the material that we got today from Amazon, we got a lot of rocket material. We got a lot of, we got more drones so that we can have more people using the drones. We're going to be, we may be in the, we'll probably be out on those tables out there, maybe assembling rockets, so that you get, because you're going to fire your own rocket. When you build your rocket, you're going to fire your rocket, and it's yours to keep. So that'll be a little bit of fun. Doing the drones is very, very difficult. I've been struggling with trying to fly those drones for the last couple of weeks. When I realized that I was going to teach this course, they gave me one of the drones to take home. It didn't do any good. It's not easy because those controls, left and right, you think that if you move the control to the left, that you want to make that thing go to the left. Well, it depends because the drones have a switch on and off that says it's headless on or headless off, which means that if it's headless off, that means that if the drone's coming at you, controls are reversed. But if it's headless on, that means if the drone's coming at you, no matter which way you turn it, it's going to go the way you think it's going to go. So you can fly it as a headless on or headless off. I'm not sure I can fly it either way. But it's going to be a lot of fun to do that. Part of the idea is that I want to get you guys enthusiastic about aviation in general. You have to have an observer. You have to have somebody who's handling the rocket. Yeah, that's true. Drones. But it's even more true of rockets. When you have rockets, you've got to have people really carefully assembling the engines into the rocket. And then you have to attach the wires correctly. Then you have a firing range that nobody can fire a rocket unless they've gotten the approval. And so there are a lot of safety features that we're going to be looking at when it comes to firing rockets especially. Because each little load we put in there, we can put heavier and heavier and heavier load, which is going to drive the rocket up higher and higher. We don't want any explosions on the ground, nothing like that. Most of the time, they don't happen because the manufacturer of the rockets has done a very good job of trying to keep them safe and keep the rocket fuel from igniting or exploding on the ground. They've gone a long way. It's a pretty safe operation. So, any questions now about what's going to happen in the next 2 days? Hands on. We're not going to do any lecturing. We're going to come in here. We're going to start doing things, building things, or trying to fly things, or whatever. Okay. Any questions? All right, you can go 10 minutes early. Okay. All right, I'll see you all tomorrow afternoon, same time.